Spin of Fate by A.A. Vora is a fantasy YA book being released May 7th of this year by Penguin Random House. And I recently read the first chapter in a new series I'm doing here on the channel. Not too recently, sorry I'm a bit late on this.
A bit late? That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. It takes you 3 weeks to read a book? That doesn't seem very booktuber standard, okay? I was eagerly awaiting seeing you get through this book, and now I had to wait 3 full weeks. Well, you, finished Dungeon Crawler Carl? The book's not even...
And it won out amongst the competition of 3 different books trying to entice me with their first chapters, much of which is conveyed here in the book's synopsis. The world is governed by Toranic law, an ancient magical force that segregates people into upper and lower realms based on their morality. It's said that if the sinful lowers commit themselves to kindness, their souls will lighten, allowing them into the blissful upper realms. But Aina, one of the few lowers to ever ascend, just wants to go back, desperate to reunite with her mother, who remains stuck in their horror-infested homeland. Aina joins the Balancers, a group that defies Toranic law by bringing aid to those condemned to a life of suffering in the lower realms. Alongside Aina are 2 new recruits, Aranel, a spoiled noble spying for the upper authorities, and Mizan, a ruthless fighter trying to save his clan from extinction. Before long, Aina, Aranel, and Mizan find themselves in the midst of a brewing war. On one side, a violent lower king is bent on destroying Toranic law. On the other, the upper authorities will do anything to stay on top. The trio must face both sides head-on if they want to stop a conflict that could break not only Toranic law, but the universe itself. And the word I would use to describe Spin of Fate in a positive and negative way is clean. This book is so clean. And starting with the positive, from a developmental standpoint, it feels like Spin of Fate was meticulously planned out by the author. In terms of like the satisfying feeling you get as a reader when so many pieces are carefully laid into place. Spin of Fate, in terms of its concepts, certainly has some things you're going to have seen before, but it does a lot with those concepts and layers in a lot of cultural interest and characterization to, as we've said actually surprisingly a lot here recently on the channel, do what you know extremely well and with a bend to it that's new enough to really liven up the flavor of the story. Anyone who has tried to plan out or just start writing a fantasy epic can attest to the fact that in terms of managing pacing with ideas, themes, tying it all together in a narrative that comes across smoothly, it is a web that insists on tangling itself, and the challenge with every new line is trying to maintain a pattern to create the tapestry you are weaving. I think my metaphor got a little confused there, but you get it. And in that one sense, Spin of Fate can throw with the best. Just a wonderful, thought-out web of ideas originating in spiritual belief, building our views on the world, which create institutions that then safeguard self-fulfilling cycles. From this situation, our wider conflict emerges, creating 4 factions that our cast of characters come into with their own motivations that drive the story. Before you type anything, stop it. I'm well aware different realms descending into like a hell-type situation, eventually getting to unimaginable horrors, is something we've all seen before, but I cannot stress enough. It doesn't matter if the premise of your story is something people have seen before. There are over 8 billion people on the planet, with a shocking number of them creating stories. Everything has been done in some way. What's important is what you do with your setting after it is established, and that is where Spin of Fate thrives. I have seen so many authors say something along the lines of, yeah, I had this idea, but it seemed like this, so yes, that! And possibly my favorite aspect to this setup for Spin of Fate is the fact that it does not make each individual realm like a uniform space. Instead, there are people within each realm that have shared qualities, but they distinguish themselves by having their own motivations, which ends up playing into this interesting clash of our cast that towards the end of Spin of Fate elevates the entire material. So you may have seen a character moving between realms before and causing conflict, but I think you have not seen it interpreted this way. I will say I was less of a fan of this book in the first half. This one is going to suffer from people DNFing because they just don't push through to the end, and then being really frustrated when they hear all these people say like, no, the end's what makes it, and you have to go back and decide whether or not you're going to start from the beginning or pick up. That's going to happen a lot to people because the word of mouth is going to be like, oh, if you DNF it, don't. I will say where that clean kind of comes in to be a criticism, though, is my immersion into the environments of this world. I couldn't help but feel continually throughout this book that the author had a very clear vision of a scene before them. It just wasn't always conveyed to me with enough detail to satisfy my preferences. Granted, I'm the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time guy, yada, yada, yada. I like me some really descriptive scenes, but this felt to be pretty extreme on the other end of the spectrum, and especially with a world that is so full of cultural influences and characters who are coming from all these wildly different backgrounds. I really wanted to see that be a bit more vibrant in the text, and it only ever flamed up a few times. And while we're getting into my, not criticisms, but points of contention, let's call them, I can see why two of the things that this is compared to in its own marketing are Avatar: The Last Airbender and Naruto. In terms of dialogue, that is the style of characterization that's going to be throughout the entire book. Characters speak very bluntly. There is a lot of repeating, just overt telling of information. I get it's YA, so it's trying to make sure that people of, varying ages can keep up. But yeah, for me as a reader who does this probably a bit too much, it became a little frustrating at times with me wanting a scene to get moving, and it leans into kind of one of my biggest issues with Sanderson when he writes YA. Kids, while they do have their own way of speaking, do communicate with each other, especially shockingly well. And I never got that like full Stephen King writing kid characters level of, wow, this person gets a younger, 15-year-old or so's mind. And I had to cross out a note, though, about characterization, because when I came across the cast at the beginning, I thought these are very cookie cutter. But again, with the DNF point I was making, don't feel safe with how people are first presented, and put trust in Spin of Fate that neat angles to these characters are to come. And I don't mean to say like every bit of dialogue was bad. I mean, in a show like Avatar or in a manga like Naruto, there's going to be lines that hit hard. One specifically here in Spin of Fate, I simply found it fitting that you'd have a violent soul. In context, great line. But that for me was then undercut by a couple of scenes where there'd be like a really good setting of character and understanding of power dynamics, and then they would just be a bit too overtly stated. A line for me that was an example of this was when someone said, "You have to fight for what we take for granted, but you're used to having to fight for things, aren't you?" I had clearly gotten that, and so had all the characters, and so there's just a few lines where it's like, yeah, we know. And just last real criticism out of the way, one of my big pet peeves, especially as I'm getting older with books, is just vague for no reason. And there was a couple characters saying things like, this could be everything, or it could be nothing. To which my response in the real world would be, a lot of fucking help you are, dude. But now that the criticism part is over, I have so much positive to say about Spin of Fate. And the majority of that is going to be how it treats its own themes and ideas. Because one of my hesitations going into YA books is when one of my biggest frustrations with this subgenre, authors dumb down their ideas. I understand being a bit more over-explainy, trying to really make sure people of all ages get stuff, but that doesn't mean the ideas behind what you're trying to say should ever be dumbed down. And Spin of Fate is really doing a phenomenal job of handling the idea of spiritual growth, institutions, and self-fulfilling vicious cycles in a way that I think kids can understand and adults can appreciate. And in some ways, having this cast be used as a mouthpiece for something that is dealing with these wider, heavier concepts for a younger audience does make up some ground that maybe critically I'm being too harsh on. Maybe this serves a purpose in a way, and I need to be more giving there. I'm kind of hesitant to double down on that angle. It bothered me, but I really get the choice. And there's something with that kind of characterization where characters are so vulnerable and blunt with each other that means when really heavy emotional scenes come, they tend to be able to hit really hard. It's one of the few bonuses with that more blunt characterization where you're able to say like, oh, this person's been so vulnerable. Now they're in pain and expressing it very articulately. And I'm happy to say that if you are a Sanderson or really just a fan of harder magic systems being the main thrust behind a story, Spin of Fate is riding that popular wave within fantasy superbly well. Magic beats throughout not only this world, but the story itself. From the driving force of the conflict to embodying the systems the book is commenting on, Spin of Fate pulses with its chitrons, which I think is how you say it's magical thing. I read it, not listened to it. What can I say? I mean, my favorite conflict throughout the book was actually the plotline following the study and experimentation of said system and the harsh truth it reveals and how the various factions are then reacting to that harsh truth. And then we get into the most beautiful angle to Spin of Fate, and that would be having a mixed bag of characters doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, the right thing for the wrong reason, and vice versa swap in between. Which is why I am happy to say the ending of this book is just making book 2 a must read. I think Spin of Fate was really good, and I'm excited to see how this author is going to improve and deliver on their next entry. It's somehow kind of a cozy read, while also permeating with a soft tension from beginning to end. There is a danger that you feel in great child media, whether it is Avatar or His Dark Materials, which also shares parallels with this book. YA media can still bring danger and commentary and ideas to the table, and Spin of Fate is thriving in those categories while just having some rough edges. So, getting a bit more into the specifics here, this isn't a book that just follows one character. I want to make that clear. In fact, we're mostly following our three main crew, Mizan, Aranel, and Aina. Aina is a magical girl, as I previously mentioned, who has a twist to her soul that is visible on everyone's forehead. And from there, that unique angle to her builds into a whole lot of the overall narrative we see play out in Spin of Fate. Mizan is a not as privileged as Aranel person who is trying to fight for a clan and is super motivated to achieve something that ends up shifting. That's kind of the really fun part about following this whole cast, and is possibly best exemplified in Aranel, the person who is descending from the highest noble origin of our three and ends up falling into the conflict as well. And I really enjoy how our main crew ends up butting heads within this book in completely understandable ways. And now I'm going to shift into some specific recommendations because of the treatment of children as, yeah, the dialogue could use some work, but overall able to be threatened and understand complex ideas. If you are a fan of Philip Pullman, that is an immediate go-to recommendation for sure. And because of the inclusion of the social commentary that is within this book, as well as the examination of trauma and the willingness to have core central characters who are protagonists end up blurring the line with antagonists, I'm also going to say that if you are a fan of Rebecca Kwong's work, this one should absolutely be on your radar as well. And then finally, despite the lacking painting a picture for you visually at times in the text, the devotion Spin of Fate has to its own world building and logic pushing through the magic system from beginning to end and being so core to what makes the story begin in the first place. Sanderson fans, especially those that enjoy his YA writing, are going to be ones who should pick up Spin of Fate. It's kind of a mix of these three, which is not bad company to be in. And as the author continues throughout their career, because this is a debut, I am really excited to see how their style grows throughout the Fifth Realm series. Fifth Realm, is that what it's called? I'll double check. But before we close out this review and give a rating, I want to give a tremendous thank you to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform designed to help entrepreneurs succeed and stand out online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell them anything from products to content to time, all in one place on your terms. Not only can you learn the tips and tricks of the trade, but they're jam-packed with features to really give you that extra boost and momentum. Their asset library allows you to upload, organize, and access all of your content from one place, as well as manage all your files from one central hub and use them across the entire Squarespace platform. And for anyone who doesn't have a background in technology and feels like managing a website could be overwhelming, Squarespace's flexible website templates allow you to get creative without having to know any of the technical know-how. With a list of professional designs for every category in use. With their Fluid engine, you just drag and drop assets into place for both desktop and mobile, unlocking your creativity for how you want to present your brand. Whether it's blogs, email campaigns, appointment scheduling, gated member areas, and more, they've got everything you need to get started. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to www.squarespace.com/Daniel Green and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain and get your business running today. Bump my chin for the end. We're out! For me, this book is going to be between a 7 to an 8 and closer to an 8 than a 7. And with this being a debut and the greatest growth you typically see from authors being between their first and second book, I'm just so ready. I'm immediately down for a book 2. It's similar to how I feel with the Fallout TV show, where it's like season 1, wonderfully done setup, but now you gotta use it to propel yourself to greatness, and I hope that's the execution we see with the Fifth Realm series. With this not being out though, no spoilers section, because none of you have read it. You just gotta take my word on it and add it to your TBR if this sounds like it's up your alley. And thank you so much for tuning in. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And physical copies of Neon Ghost are now available on shop.wraithmark.com. Thank you all so much. Have a good one. Peace.